So, how do you manage when a loved one is addicted?
Welcome to Momversations today on the Win-Win Women platform. I'm Natasha and this is Megan, and we are your hosts today.
Our goal with these conversations is to enrich motherhood together and help us all keep calm and mom on.
The topic of today's Momversation is addicted to love, managing when your loved one is addicted.
For the first half hour, we'll be discussing how you can take care of yourself, look for moments of joy, and continue supporting and loving your loved one with an addiction. Then we will invite you to unmute and join the conversation for the second half hour.
Yes, please share your input, ask questions, just take advantage of this unique platform where we can share and collaborate and connect with each other.
So, how do you manage when a loved one is addicted?
This is such a heavily stigmatized topic in our culture and society, but one, unfortunately, that I have a lot of experience with. Nobody wants to talk about it. So it's kind of like a dark, shameful secret that a lot of families are having to keep to themselves. Addiction is one of those things where we just subconsciously believe keeping quiet will make the problem go away. But that doesn't fix problems. That never fixes
Right.
problems. Even this week, I just kept putting off like taking down any notes for this conversation. It was something that I didn't want to talk about. And just that's my automatic response, especially when it comes to talking about my dad, who suffered from a few addictions of his own. So I have to keep reminding myself, even as someone who's been inside that ripple of addiction, that it's a mental disease, that people who suffer at the hands of their addictions, they aren't bad people. They don't come from bad families. They might not have had anything triggering or traumatic in their past that led to an addiction. They are just 100% in survival mode all the time. And just at the mercy of, there's physical rewiring in the brain when it comes to an addiction. And when I think of it in those terms, things for me start to make more sense, and I have a little bit more compassion and openness about it.
Well, and that is a point we need to get at, is trying to get to that point of being able to have compassion, because I think sometimes we go through a series of emotions when we uncover the addiction and become aware of the things that were put in the dark and now they're coming to light.
I would even say, you're going through the steps of grief. At this point,
there might be denial, there might be anger, there might be, I don't remember,
bargaining.
Yes.
Sorry, continue.
No, I'm glad you brought that up. If you receive our Smile newsletter that goes out every week, we included in there a link to a TEDx talk. That was done by a young woman. She was turning 21 actually on the day she gave the talk. And she was sharing what her life had been like for the 5 years since they had her brother had gone into this realm of addiction. And something she brought up that was surprising is how dangerous addiction is for the family members. That it's not just the addict themselves who is suffering, but that there are ways that addiction ripples out and has, consequences. And we need to become aware of that, because if we don't realize it and be able to constructively build coping skills, then things take over and destructive habits materialize that attempt to bury the burden rather than carry it.
I did watch that TED Talk, and I remember her even saying that she started her own self-destructive behaviors.
Yeah.
She started to self-harm because of the anxiety and the depression and the worry and the fear that their family was experiencing. That point that you said that it's more dangerous for the families than the addict themselves, I wouldn't have thought that while I was in the middle of the chaos.
Right.
So when she said that, I was listening to it yesterday. I was just like, it opened up something in my brain. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That
you couldn't see in the moment.
I couldn't see it then.
But now with hindsight.
Yeah, there were a lot of things that just kept our family on the edge and sometimes even going over the edge a lot of times. So like, not only do you have to watch this person you love destroy themselves and become someone completely unrecognizable and driven by invisible demons.
Right.
And a lot of times they're not asking for help.
Right.
I wouldn't say they're happy in their misery, but they don't have the strength to get out of their misery alone.
Well, and as mentioned, their brains have rewired to where they don't even realize they need help.
Exactly. So yeah, you're watching them destroy themselves day in and day out. And so it is hard on the family to do that. But among other things, like you said, it's that ripple effect. Like all areas of the family's life become affected by this one thing. So my dad had a number of health issues most of his life. I didn't find out until later when I was an adult. And I'd moved out of the house and everything and put as much distance as I could between me and my parents, that he actually suffered from Crohn's disease. And so it is an autoimmune disease that affects your intestinal tract. And it's fire breathing pain all the time.
That's terrible.
So when I was growing up, there were emergency room visits. There were surgeries. He had his spleen taken out. He had a good length of his digestive tract taken out to try to help this but he was in a lot of pain, still in a lot of pain for so many years. And so this is through the 90s and the early 2000s, where they didn't really understand a whole lot about Crohn's disease management. They probably didn't even know what it was at the time, but solution was pain medication. So the pain medication,
even though it was prescription,
he got addicted to the opioids. And it just got worse from there. Like the opioids, I think, worked well for a few years. But he then moved on to cocaine.
Well, because your body builds up.
It builds up the tolerance.
Or something.
Yeah,
tolerance, that's the word. And so, if X number of milligrams used to help, it doesn't anymore.
Right.
So.
And, 10, 15 years later, they're starting to crack down on the opioid crisis. That's a hard word to say fast.
Right.
But so he moved on to cocaine, which was had a lot more effect on his pain. And it was a lot more easily accessible because he didn't have to go through his doctor.
Who was going to limit it? Yeah.
Who was limiting. And then towards the end, I learned that he had gone over to meth, which is not an opioid. It's a stimulant, but for some reason he had made that
served that purpose for him.
It did what he needed it to. But looking back now, I try not to think of my childhood, but for the purpose of this Momversation, I believe her name was Sam Fowler, that young lady who was doing the TED Talk, when she said it was more dangerous for the families, like I said, it was like this door was opened in my mind and I was like, holy crap. Yeah, this can explain a lot of stuff. So we were not allowed to answer our phone. So we had a landline. We were not allowed to answer our phone. We were not allowed to listen to any of the messages because we had collectors calling all the time, all day, every day, We were getting bank notices that our house was going to be taken away from us at any moment. We lived in this constant fear of losing what we had.
Wow.
And my mother was very open about the fact that my dad was getting credit card offers in the mail, and he would fill them out and get credit cards and then max out the balances at like an ATM to get cash so he could go get what he needed.
I see.
And so they were hundreds of thousands of dollars in credit card debt, and constantly on the verge of, we've had cars repoed. Like a tow truck followed us to a Hollywood video one time and towed our car while we were picking out a video. Constant on the verge of losing our house.
That's the anxiety.
That's the anxiety. I
have
have extreme fear of debt at this point in my life. Like, okay, I have for a long time, but my husband understands now why. So like any kind of credit card debt, like, no,
Just
any
don't go
car
there.
payment, no, like we pay for cash. We don't do that. Just to ease my anxiety.
Right.
But so as a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, the only thing I could think to do is to just try to eliminate that financial burden that I was making on the family. So I worked 2 jobs while I was trying to finish high school. I paid for my own clothes, my own food. I paid for my insurance, health insurance, like car payments, gas, anything like that. I just tried to take that away from the household.
Even though it meant taking it on yourself.
It took it on for me.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm grateful for that because I learned to be independent. And when I did move out of the house, I already knew how to balance a checkbook. I knew what bills I had to pay. I was very self-sufficient.
Yeah.
But even as a 16-year-old, that's a lot of stress.
It is.
And so it was, the financial stress of it was very chaotic for our family. But the worst part was probably when he would come down off his highs and he would come after me and my brother for the smallest discrepancies. And so we didn't know what was happening at the time. Like you
weren't able to put it in context of he's coming down from a high. So
it never even entered our minds that there was an addiction at play.
Oh, okay.
We had no idea.
Do you think that would have been helpful to know, to be able to?
I think it would have been. Yeah. So my brother, he's 11 months younger than me. I was 16, 17. So he's just a little bit younger. I think at that point, it would have eased a lot of the fear.
Okay.
It would have given us a reason.
Didn't change your father's behavior. It might not have changed, but at least being able to put the behavior in context and manage it differently, possibly.
Yeah, I think so.
Like
looking back now, that's, I think, what I would have wanted is just to have a reason, because when you are getting the crap beat out of you and you don't know why, suddenly this person that you have trusted and you have loved is turning against you. Like, I would have liked to have a reason.
That. Maybe it wouldn't have been an excuse.
Not an excuse,
but at least a way to filter it and process it, and maybe then deal with it differently later.
Right.
Like if you had understood, okay, he's coming down from a high, I better leave the house or something.
Yeah. So there was this stigma even in my own house that we didn't talk about it.
And that stigma was addressed by this young lady in the TED Talk.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting to hear you coming around to that of maybe if it hadn't been shoved in the closet, and
it would have been a lot
easier
to handle.
Maybe
even if it was just in our own home. Like, I didn't want everybody to know.
Right.
But even if my mom had just had, or even my dad had just had a frank conversation about, this is what's happening, this is how we should deal with it.
Yeah.
there was no plan. There was just shove it into the closet and hope nobody notices.
Right.
And I think that it got bigger and bigger and bigger to the point it broke our family. Like I moved out as soon as I could.
Yeah.
My brother joined the military as soon as he turned 18. Like we needed to get out of that house. But yeah, we were just kind of forced to deal with it alone. And so I think in some respects that brought us closer, because now we're closer than we ever have been.
As brother and sister.
As brother and sister.
Okay.
And it's because we're just like, oh my gosh, this is what happened to us. We need to talk about it.
Yeah.
So like I said, I moved out, my brother moved out. I knew deep down that my dad loved us. I knew that he wanted to be a good dad, and he was trying so hard. I knew that he cared about us, but he just couldn't. He couldn't
manifest it.
Yeah.
So you could sense the emotion was there, but the visual indication, outward behavior was impossible.
He couldn't change
under the chain of addiction.
Yeah.
Well, that is pain for you on a psychological level, just like he was dealing with pain physically.
Yeah.
You were dealing with the pain psychologically. Addiction just thrusts those symptoms on the people who care and love the addict. So the addict has their own set of symptoms, coming down from the highs, things like that. But then the family has symptoms that are basically just thrust upon them. Anxiety, we already mentioned. Depression makes sense to kind of be trying to find a low point of not having to, hope for higher, better things. That, as we already talked about a little bit, shame and guilt by association, being aware that laws are being broken, for instance. Well, there might be bruises.
Right. And specifically in Utah, especially during the 1990s and the 2000s, there was this pressure. They call it the bubble, where the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is very prevalent in Utah. And there was a very long time where the pressure to constantly be perfect, be that perfect Christ-like family, was closing in on everybody. I don't know if you ever felt that.
I didn't grow up here, so that might have made a difference.
Okay. I grew up here from the age of 8 onward. And yeah, once we converted to the church, it was like we were a whole different people. We were just like, we had to be prim and proper and under control. And there were no dark secrets or skeletons in our closet. And so I think that too increased the pressure. And that was partially why I had so much resentment towards the church in my youth. I don't now, but because I understand now that's not the purpose of the church, but at the time, that's what everybody had translated it to in their heads. It's like, oh, we're striving to be Christ-like, so we need to have the perfect families. And if you don't look perfect, then you are obviously doing something wrong. Like God doesn't love you.
And so it was harder to be able to actually manage and develop coping skills.
And you couldn't rely on anybody else outside of your own little immediate family.
That's rough. So in that case, you might try to be anonymous. And that was a thing brought up in that TED Talk, to repress those feelings. And you also brought up feelings of fear and doubt, of not knowing where to turn from here, and how, who to trust, things like that. And then there's the idea that you can fix it. And so you become consumed with that attempt to try to fix everything. And
you love this person, you want to help them, and you want them to get better.
In your case, that meant taking the monetary, financial burdens on yourself. And then, of course, because that person is not able to fulfill their role, like in your case as a father, then there's loneliness. And I think that's a significant factor. You've lost that person as the father.
Yeah.
So in the midst of suffering these symptoms that have been thrust upon you, and while you're trying to love an addicted person, how can you take care of yourself while trying to still be there for the addicted person?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
As angry as I am about how addiction has affected my childhood and even my adulthood, and for as much blame as I want to put on my dad, I really had to come to terms with the fact that I wasn't ever going to be enough for him to want to change. Like, the connection that we had wasn't enough. We were so close before everything started going crazy, but it wasn't enough. And I think that's because there's really no logic when addictions are involved. You know, we talked about the rewiring of the brain. There's a physical rewiring of the brain when it comes to addiction, because those electric impulses that your brain sends are looking for the fastest way to get to that pleasure button. And they will carve through and bypass so many areas of the brain just to hit that button faster.
Yeah.
And so there's no logic involved. There's no emotion involved when it comes to being in an addiction. And I had to realize that it wasn't about me.
Yeah.
Like, I was so angry as a teenager that he would let himself get so far gone.
Yeah.
I was so mad, but it had nothing to do with me.
Right.
It had nothing to do with me. And I've watched a few other TED Talks on addiction, and just listening to other people's stories, you know, and there was a wife whose husband was an alcoholic, and he ended up passing away from his alcoholism. And even she was just like, you know, I wasn't enough. Our children weren't enough, but it wasn't about us.
Right.
So
you couldn't have done more.
Couldn't have.
It's not that you, that's
It's not that we're not trying.
Right.
It's
Right.
that we can't do it alone. And honestly, we were scared a lot of the time. So we were ashamed that this had happened inside our family. And I think it's natural to have those initial reactions.
Right.
But I've learned that there should have been a time when I sat down and just did the research, just tried to find out as much as possible as I could about this disease. I didn't know that he was addicted to cocaine until after I was married. My husband and I were living in my parents' basement for a few months while we were moving state to state at the time before we had kids. And my dad walked into our room one day and he's just like, I needed to tell you that I have been addicted to cocaine for a long time and I'm working on it. I'm trying really hard to overcome this. But that wasn't until I was 23, 24, 25, wow, maybe. I should have a better memory than that, but I don't.
Yeah.
So at that moment, I should have been, okay, let me figure out what's going on, how I can help, do the research. I'm a very analytical person. If I have a plan set up, I will follow it to the step without deviating. And I didn't even bother to make a plan.
Yeah, it felt so chaotic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was, even at that time, I probably didn't think back, oh, that's why all these things happened while we were living in the house. But I think that research would have given me that first step to becoming unafraid of addiction. And that I should have just been honest.
Knowledge can be
open.
The antithesis of fear.
Yeah, exactly. I'm only now seeing that he's gone. That there were little moments of joy mixed in with all the chaos. And like, I can't look at an avocado right now.
An avocado.
And not cry. Because when I was growing up, he knew that I loved avocados. So he would go out of his way to get me an avocado every week from the store. And he would just say, here, I got you an avocado. And he knew that I loved him and he would try to make me happy. And I just remember long talks while he was trying to teach me how to drive. Whenever my mom taught me how to drive, she would just yell at me the whole time. But he was a really good teacher. And we would just have these long talks about what was going on in my life, what boys I liked, all this stuff. And like looking back now, I can see like I missed those moments. But they got so buried underneath all of the anger and all of the confusion and all of the resentment that it took. I mean, he's been gone 2 years now for me to remember those.
Yeah.
And so I would say, do your research, figure out how to become unafraid of addiction, and really just try to remember those little moments of joy to keep you going, and before it's too late.
That's great advice. Addiction does cast that shadow, but it's in the darkness that the stars can shine the best. So look for those moments of light, even in the midst of it. And there's a possibility that as you focus on that with the addict, that those light points of light can become more common. There really is hope for addicts. The same plasticity of the brain that allowed it to be rewired for the substance. And it's not always just a physical substance. Sometimes it's pornography, for instance, also rewires the brain, even though that's a visual substance. But if possible, surround yourselves, like you and your loved one, with recovered addicts whose long-term successes can be inspiring and motivating. There's also an organization called the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and right now they are looking for families of opioid addicts specifically. They want to offer 12 weeks of support and education free of cost. And so you would just go to familysupportstudy.com to determine if you're eligible. We're out of time. Unfortunately, we hope you got something out of today's Momversation. We'd love to hear your story. If you are trying to love and support an addict in your life, go to Facebook. We are at Momavate. And on Instagram, we are at Momavate Moms. Now you can also sign up for that weekly SMILE newsletter that we've mentioned. SMILE is an acronym for support, music, inspiration, laughter, and education. And in each of these, we try to follow that theme for the Momversation and cover. So there's music about addiction and things like that. So there's also more help out there. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Hotline is 1-800-662-HELP. It's free, it's confidential, year-round. They have treatment options, other services, and they are there to help.
Thank you to our viewers for checking in with us this week. And thank you to our behind the scenes friends at the Win-Win Women Network, who make it all possible to care, connect, and collaborate in this unique way.
We're going to stop the recording for now and start our live interaction with our viewers. If you've watched this on Roku or as a recording, be sure to catch our live show every Saturday at 9 a.m. Pacific time. Through the winwinwomen.tv website, and that way you can participate in the second half where we continue the conversation directly with you, and you can even ask for a text reminder. We'll send it out to let you know that the show is live. So you sign up for that by texting 81010 and putting in the text at Momavate.
Yep, we want to include you in our Momavate community. So please stick around to enjoy the Momversation and check back with us next Saturday for our next episode.
Oh, yes, we're going to have a special guest.
Yay!
Her name is Mo McElroy, and she has a delightful way to make Mother's Day a little more comfortable. So many of us
I need
struggle
that. I need that.
with Mother's Day.
I'll be there.
Yeah, I'm grateful for her new perspective on things and new ideas of how to process this holiday a little differently.
Awesome.
So,
See you next week.
all right.
Oh yeah. You got it.